Tonight on True North News, we have Adam Padzik, a longtime friend of mine and host of For What It's Worth podcast. All good now. He just started his own YouTube channel, Below the Fold, and today we will be talking about his recent experiences at the Munk debate in Toronto between David Frum and Stephen Bannon. So welcome to the show, Adam.
Thanks, David. Great to be on. Daniel, I'm sorry.
Yeah, all the D's.
Bloopers. Yeah.
So before we get started, I just wanted to open with a little anecdote because Adam actually gave me my first taste of online Canadian political punditry when I appeared on his show, For What It's Worth, I guess 3.5 years ago, ahead of the last federal election, where I was actually representing the Liberals and Justin Trudeau. So funny how things have changed, Adam.
It's amazing. Well, I hope there's more people like you in a year from now.
Yeah. So maybe we'll find a link to the archived video and share that with our followers. So I can't even remember what I was saying back then. So I should go back myself and check it out.
Yep.
So enough of us catching up. So let's get right into it. So let's start out with just your experience going to the debate and like actually getting to the venue and stuff, and all the protesters and even what was going on beforehand with like the NDP trying to deplatform Steve Bannon beforehand.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, from sort of the time of buying the tickets, it was actually pretty standard Munk debate stuff, which is tickets are gone in 15-20 minutes, and they all go to supporters of Munk debates. So Munk debates runs a system whereby you support them in a donation, which is tax deductible, and that gives you first crack at tickets. There is never tickets left after supporters get them, and so usually, regardless of the debate, I've been to the last 4 or 5 and they just always go really fast, and so that's what happened with the populism debate. What was different though is soon after, first, it started out slow as the word started to spread that Steve Bannon was going to be part of the debate, and then him getting actually disinvited from the New Yorker Festival to speak there. And so things started to grow, but really they reached a fever pitch probably about a week and a half before the debate, where, like you mentioned, a bunch of community groups got together, put out statements. The bigger networks picked it up, the CBCs, the CTVs. And like you said, eventually, or around the same time, the NDP also came out and basically said, this should not be happening. We ask that this be canceled, this sort of thing. So this is the sort of environment where that was going on as Friday approached. And Friday night was a bit of a sort of soggy evening in Toronto. It had rained that day. It's the typical fall Toronto evening. And my wife and I, we got down there around 5 o'clock. We were going to go grab some dinner. And already at 5, with the debate to start at 7 o'clock, there were already people gathered on the corner there where Roy Thompson Hall is. And the big news networks were setting up. People were already standing there with signs and stuff like that. So you can kind of see that this was going to be a little bit different than usual. You could already see the police presence. We went and had dinner. We came back around 6:15 to try and go and make our way inside the venue. Well, at this point, that was going to be a bit of a wait. So basically what you had is 2 lines leading into the main entrance to the hall, long lines of people who are waiting to get in, cops everywhere, and protesters essentially everywhere. They were mainly clustered around the front doors, but a bunch of them would also make their way over to where people were waiting in line and were sort of getting into interactions with people. And most of that was yelling, things like shame, Nazis, things like that. In general, and then also to certain people that were in line. I myself got to talking to a couple of people there. I had a good example of where I met 2 people. One was not very interested in really having a dialogue, I felt. It was more about sort of getting their point out and quite aggressively. And the other was actually willing to have a back and forth discussion. So I wouldn't say that everyone there was, totally closed-minded, but the overall feeling, and again, the noise and everything else, it was about getting in there, getting in people's faces. And I don't know that anybody there expected to actually shut it down that night at that point, but it was definitely about making people uncomfortable and making sure that their opinion about the whole thing got through. So we we got into line, and then it took us. I think we probably got into the venue probably close to 7. So it had already been delayed because people were expected to be in their seats by 6:45. That's what we had been told on our tickets, and that's what actually I got a robocall from Roy Thompson Hall a week before, reminding us about when to be in our seats, and also actually about their policies around bring items that you can bring in, and you were only allowed to bring bags that were of a certain size. So this whole thing again, it was just part of getting prepared for this evening. It was very different than before.
I have one
Anyway,
question,
so
Anton.
yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned you had been to the last 4 Monk debates. How does this kind of like protester presence compare to previous ones, especially considering like the last one was Jordan B. Peterson, another very controversial figure,
Yeah, no,
racist
it's funny.
kind of Nazi kind of
Lots of things
accusations
that you
thrown at
could,
him as
yeah.
well. Often, was there a similar kind of protester presence at
No,
at that last rally
no, no. It was
debate?
specific to Peterson. I don't recall seeing anything. I don't remember which debate it was, but I do recall sometimes there being people maybe passing out literature, or something like that, but very, very small scale. Nothing with that kind of media interest.
Hmm.
So it was definitely beyond anything we had seen before. Certainly not the kind of police presence that was there. Police on horseback, all up and down the actual lines inside the venue as well. But essentially, we made it in, and got to our seats, and it was the debate had been delayed, and they actually finally decided to start it, but still without everybody in their seats. So
And were
yeah,
you in
that
your
was kind of
seats? Did you make it
yeah.
to your seats?
We were lucky. Yeah, we were lucky, and we were in our seats when everything started.
Awesome. So you got to participate in that first vote as well.
Yes, that's right. Which
Okay.
was, by the way, the first time they voted with automatic
Yeah.
uh, clickers or whatever you want to call it. Up till now, it was done via Scantron. You got a little sheet of paper, filled in with your pencil, and you dropped it in. And so at the end of you filled it in before you sat down. So then they tabulated it, and you knew what the score was. This is the thing; it never really took that long. I think the improvement here is not that great. I mean, you filled out your little Scantron before you sat in your seat, and by the time the debate got going, they could show you the stats already. So anyway, this time it was with a clicker, and as you have read, there were some issues with that at the end of
Mhm.
the night. But yeah, we were in our seats.
And then how did you feel about the police presence? You mentioned it was elevated compared to most events that you attend in Toronto, not just Monk debates. Uh,
Yeah.
but did you feel like it was well dealt with, or was it, did it make things worse? There was some
I
a cop got
Yeah.
punched. I read and hit with a stick. Like, what do you think it
Yeah.
was
I
negative or a positive?
So I think overall it's great that I think it was handled really well, especially that we got in the couple of people inside the venue that actually managed to voice their protest, were handled very well. The thing about the cop presence is that no matter what, when you see that happening, it's going to elevate sort of your level of anxiety in general. Some people say that that's oh well, they're the ones causing the anxiety. It's a byproduct that you can't get away from, but it's better that they're there, that they're not. Somebody has to deal with these things. Somebody has to keep people apart. And so I was very happy with it. At the end of the debate, the moderator thanked the Toronto Police as one of the few groups that helped put this whole thing on, and everyone applauded. Everyone was very happy with it.
Mhm. And then how do you think how did you feel about how they dealt with the protesters that got inside the venue? Like there was the one right off of the opening statements that stood up and unveiled her banner and started yelling.
Yeah, so
How do
that
you?
was interesting. So Bannon just started speaking, and a woman stood up in sort of not the ground floor, but the first level, just above the ground floor, and she unfurled a big banner: "No hate, no room for Bannon's bigotry," or something like that. And she started yelling, and so the crowd started to try and clap to kind of get her to sit down. And this is a tactic which is also used with the debaters when their time is up. The crowd claps so that the debater knows that it's time for them to sit down and for somebody else to speak. So she was encouraged to kind of take her seat. And then, in my opinion, one of the most interesting parts of the night happened, whereby the moderator actually said to her, "We're going to follow the following protocol tonight, and you can stay if you'd like. We'll let you sit down and the debate can continue, but you have to stop interrupting. And what do you want to do? Basically, he said to her, do you want to stay or do you want to go? And she said, and everybody could hear her, she said, I'll stay. And then everybody, again, applauded. But unfortunately, she did keep talking and she did keep yelling, at which point the moderator had to say, okay, well, you're not following what you said you would do, and so we're going to have to ask the police to remove you. At which point they came down, she went with them. There was no physical altercation. I don't even know if they touched her. Maybe it was just like leading her by the arm or something. She wasn't resisting. I think she did what she came to do. They took her banner, they walked her out, and it continued. Bannon took it in stride. He even refused to take another extra minute on his clock for that interruption. So it just seemed like everyone, from the debaters to the moderator to the crowd, like everything just kind of flowed as these things happened during the night.
Yeah, I thought it was dealt with really positively. Even the moderator was encouraging people to kind of clap her down. And being someone who has watched a lot of like less formal, kind of similar controversial events, like at university campuses and stuff like this, it's always a struggle to deal with the people who want to disrupt and just say, I'm using my free speech. But right off the bat, he was like, "Let's clap her down. We're 28,000 people." Like,
have you ever seen anything like that? Have you ever seen anybody do that? And basically, the reaction to somebody interrupting or protesting be like, "Well, okay, thank you, and you can actually stay."
Right? Yeah, right. It was so positive. It gave her the chance, and then everything went. As you said, it flowed really well. Whereas I've seen individuals and groups like that even totally derail smaller events where there's not as much kind of police presence, and there's not this kind of mass of respect that the Munk debates really carries. But like smaller events with people like Peterson and stuff that are controversial characters, they just drown them out, and there's very little that they can do. So I really like to watch how they dealt with that on the kind of larger scale. But I guess that's enough of the preamble. Let's get into what you thought of the actual debate. And let's just start right from the beginning, I guess, the topic. So the topic was, be it resolved, the future of Western politics is populist, not liberal. And right off the bat, I like when this event was announced a couple of months ago or whatever, a couple of weeks ago, this topic struck me as weird because it really juxtaposes the two, populism and liberalism, and they're not really, opposing sides of a spectrum. They're not. It's not really one or the other. Like, you could have a future that is both populist and liberal. If we were to break down real kind of opposing sides, it would be, liberalism versus authoritarianism. Like, a more accurate debate between these two seem to be nationalism versus globalism, or even why is Trump the bad guy, because that's mostly what they talked about. So how do you feel about the topic? Because you seemed intrigued by it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it just assumed that a lot of our current society and our in general, the way we set our society up to be governed, it lies in this sort of liberal purview. And I mean, I kind of get it, where we are more so of a liberal society, but at the same time, I don't think that everything that sort of populists stand for are actually to rip any of that apart. Like, I don't think that a lot of populists will tell you that they would like to take away certain rights and freedoms. Now, I know there's going to be people that, will try to point to certain extreme views and people on this, but realistically, if you look at the definitions, there is no juxtaposition. So I agree with you. I think it was kind of set up in a way that was a little bit problematic. Again, I think it's part of the show. Here's liberalism and here's this horde of populists. So yeah, I agree though that it was problematic for me too. And so I was curious actually to how they were going to debate that part. And yeah.
So I really think what they were trying to set up was the kind of internal debate that a lot of conservative or right-wing parties and movements are kind of undergoing right now. Like, we see the same kind of divide within the Republican Party. We've seen it emerge on the Canadian right between the People's Party of Canada and the Conservative Party, and then the more like the Trumpian kind of Republicans versus the establishment Republicans. So it seems like a relevant debate, but it was a dishonest prompt or topic, and it really just kind of feeds into this thing that really frustrates me, which has just been the kind of use of the term populism in the media, or populist, or whatever permutation of that word that you use, and it just seems to be used as one of those kind of boogeyman terms that just gets thrown around in all sorts of ways. And right off of the bat in this debate, what stood out to me is what I think a really important way to start a debate, especially when we're dealing with these kind of jargony terms, is to define our terms so we know we're on the same page. And they never really did that, and it wasn't really clear what Frum's idea of populism was from my perspective. And even in the wake, he wrote an article about the lessons he learned from debating Steve Bannon. And early on, he gives a sort of rudimentary, like not even a definition really, and it just kind of casts it off as evil. Like it's not an honest definition, like which would be like politics for and by the people, or ordinary people. He just, throughout the debate, he just cast it off as evil and ideological, and it just doesn't make much sense to me, because it's just strictly not the definition. So what do you think about?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think he totally sort of went the Trump Republican way. Everything he talked about brought everything right back to Trump. So if I was to infer what his definition was, or what he was sort of focusing on, it was Trump. It was the populism demonstrated by him and his followers. That's what it seemed like to me. And although you're right, he never actually stated it. Who did state it was Bannon. Bannon, in his opening remarks and his closing remarks, basically said, in support of his point, that he doesn't think that it's a question of whether the future is populist. It's just whether are we going to have nationalist populism, the kind that you see maybe on the right with Republicans and Trump, or are you going to have socialist populism, which you see with the kinds of people like Bernie Sanders? And so that's the part where I think that harkens sort of back to what you and I were talking about. And if we could just debate that and we could explore it more so like that, it makes a little bit more sense to compare it to that liberalism, as opposed to just focusing on Trump, which they did for most of the night.
Yeah. And then this is the kind of definition I was looking for in the article. In an article that he wrote in The Atlantic, he says, the debate in Toronto focused on a prediction whether the future belonged to populist politics. And then in brackets, he defines populists as the polite term for politics of Donald Trump and many little Trumps in power or competing for power across the earth. So right off the bat, it's like he has a very Trump-centric notion of what populism is. Like he doesn't even separate other kind of right-wing movements around the globe from Trump. They are all just little Trumps to him, and it's all just Trumpian politics. But first of all, it's absolutely absurd to me, because if anything, populism has classically derived from the left. Like workers' movements and people's movements have classically always been left-wing things, which are unbelievably populist. It's just not a term that was used as frequently until more contemporary political discourse.
Now, he's facing off against the guy who, in Bannon, that basically, was Trump's guy, who also now goes around Europe and tries to, again, get these right-wing parties off the ground. So I kind of get it. That's his opponent. That's what he's going to focus on. But he could have picked up on a little bit of that, what Bannon put down. And I think that conversation could have been elevated. And honestly, I blame the moderator for that. I think that's where we could have seen a little bit more of that prodding, because the moderator, as you notice, he totally took a step back, and he was happy to do so because it went really well. They were respecting each other, and what they said to one another was extremely entertaining and smart and great. But we missed out on that part of that populism, everything you just said too about the left and all those movements.
Yeah, the moderator was very uninvolved. He could have pulled them back away from the Trump discussions that they kept having, but I think the audience seemed to be really enjoying it. The one thing is, once he did get involved, one of the first things he did was like drill onto Bannon for not answering a question, and I know exactly how Bannon was going to answer that question. Like, Bannon is, amongst his many things on his resume, what he's doing right now is he's mostly a propagandist. That is one of his central jobs, and he's good at it. He makes scarily good propaganda. And his most recent project is something that he mentioned in the debate, and it's his documentary called, this propaganda puff piece called "Trump at War," and it starts, as he mentions in it, in the debate, with this kind of Don Lemon kind of preamble spliced in with prominent leaders like Hillary Clinton saying, "We won't
That
be
was one
civil."
of the yeah.
We,
That was one of the moments where he looked like he lost it up there.
yeah, and
When
everyone was just so ready for him to be lost. But all he was going to say is, the media is doing derisive stuff. They're doing divisive stuff. Trump stuff pales in comparison to the kind of divisive division that the media has sown into the public. So that's the answer that he was trying to provide. And you can tell from at least if you've watched the documentary and based off of later things that he says, like that's clearly where he's trying to go. But the moderator is, no, answer the question. No, answer the question. And it's like, and then he gives a simple answer. And then the moderator wants more explanation. It's like, you didn't let me explain it. I thought that was pretty ridiculous. So I don't know how great the moderator's involvement, like additional involvement, would have been for the debate, because they were pretty civil, at least, if off topic.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay. So let's focus in on kind of the two characters and the kind of central idea. So were you familiar with either Bannon or Frum going into the debate?
So Bannon, yes. Frum, not so much.
Pretty much the same with me. And then I would have said their central. So to give background for anyone who's kind of unaware, Frum is a writer and editor of The Atlantic magazine now, and previously he was a speechwriter for George W. Bush while he served as president. And Steve Bannon was the CEO of Breitbart before he left to serve as Trump's campaign manager towards the end of his campaign, and then even holding positions like chief strategist and positions on the National Security Council within the White House before he was fired. You're fired.
Which is such an interesting thing in and of itself, because nobody really knows what happened there.
Yeah.
He was such a central figure. In fact, it was brought up that he kind of turned the campaign around, around the summer of 2016. And it's not like he's come out and become anti-Trump. He still goes out there and supports Trump. So what kind of deal was struck there, or how it all went down, is one day going to make for a great book, I hope.
Yeah. Bannon definitely made it seem like he just wanted to pursue other things, but I doubt that's the whole truth. But since then, he has been doing many things, trying to catalyze the movement around the world, and back to producing propaganda like Trump at War. But let's get into more of the debate. So aside from the kind of flawed topic that debate sort of revolved around, I kind of picked out a couple of their central ideas, and I wanted you to know what you thought of them. It seemed to me that Bannon's kind of thesis was, as you mentioned, that populism was the inevitable future, and it would just be between right-wing populism and left-wing populism, whereas Frum's debate position seemed to be like just because there are flaws in a good system doesn't mean you should turn to a evil one. I don't know what that means, because populism isn't a system and it isn't innately evil. And then on top of that, we need to rebuild and renew, not tear down. Really focusing on that one Steve Bannon quote where he says that everything's going to burn or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, what do you think about those kind of two topic sentences? I guess we'll start with Frum's.
I like that Frum acknowledged the failings of the current system, or what the system has been up to this point, and the system. Of course, there's no clear definition, but let's just say whatever is not what Trump brought to the table, right? Trump rode a wave of people just being pissed off with the inability of people, of politicians to get things done, of politicians being slimy, of thoughts and prayers, of all this crap, right? So I like that Frum did that. Not knowing Frum at all, I came away really respecting Frum. Intelligent, level-headed, it seemed. Although, having re-listened to that debate today in preparation for our chat, I did notice that, which I didn't notice the first time around, was that he did, especially at the beginning, rely a little too much on kind of that like Trump hating points, and focusing on that too much, and going down that route of hate, evil, racist, blah 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 blah. But in the end, I like those parts, the things that he said about not necessarily just tearing it down, not turning to something completely different. I mean, I don't know that we can stop populism. So maybe that's sort of like now towards more Bannon's point. I honestly, I think with the climate in terms of the media and the way we share information now, and the way that the common person now gets so spun by whatever it is, talking heads like you and me, with small YouTube channels comparatively to to the big networks of the world, and people sharing, and sound bites and memes and fake news and all the rest of it. I don't know if there's we're ever going to go back. And unfortunately, those people are the fuel for the fire of populist movements, left or right. A smart politician or a smart strategist like Bannon can take that, and he has. If you look up the way that he ran, or not they hired a digital marketing consultancy to run their digital marketing ads. But the way that they were able to focus in and deliver the right message to the right person in places like social media, it doesn't take much. Let's look at our social media feeds today. The efficient use of rage, clickbait headlines, all this stuff can be taken and molded and used to sway people one way, to sway people to another. You don't need Russians for that. You can do that all by yourself. So I kind of enjoyed both of their points. I worry about populism in the way that it's manifesting itself on both left and right. So I ended up voting against the motion. I voted for the motion to start, and I voted against the motion at the end because I thought that Frum offered sort of hope. I'm not fatalistic. I think there's a ton that's right with what people are saying on that kind of more populist side. I hope there's a way out, but I don't know if we can stop what's happened already.
Yeah, those are really great points, Adam. I want to kind of drill down on kind of some of the terms in these kind of two premises, and kind of give some more depth, because I think at least I read these things a little bit differently than a lot of people, given the amount of discourse that I've done around some of this jargon. So to kind of focus in on Frum, when he talks about rebuilding and renewing the system, I really think he's talking about two things in particular. He's talking about, one, the kind of liberal international rules-based system that governs international affairs, and then two, it's the kind of political media establishment that has been built in the West, in the U.S. and Canada and all these kind of countries. So that's to say, not the new age media, not you and I talking on the internet, like the media conglomerates that are tried and true, and this political system that's proved to be efficient, and stuff like this, and organizations like the United Nations and international institutions like NATO that govern the affairs of different actors. And one thing we've seen from Trump is a turn away from that system. He's not necessarily trying to burn it all down, but he is definitely trying to strip, like he's definitely less faithful in NATO. The UN. He definitely wants to change things, the way things are done in NATO, stuff like this. He's bold in the way that he talks and the way that he tweets in the international sphere towards hostile agents like North Korea and Iran. Like he doesn't follow the rules. So this is what he's really kind of trying to get at when he says the system. Like there is a particular system, but I think the more interesting part is on the other side of the argument, which is populism, and I don't think he really addressed kind of why populism has become so successful around the world, and it's really because we've seen uh, there has been a number of adverse effects in the modernization of the economy and in the modernization of the world that has had adverse effects on workers in different, especially Western countries, as we've seen production move to other countries because of globalization, and as we've seen manufacturing getting further hollowed out by automation and technological change. Their workers have become a more and more vulnerable group, but at the same time, we've seen politics trend away from them for some reason. And I generally think that reason would be because they've been hijacked by oligarchs and special interest groups and stuff like this. You've seen, especially left-wing politics, which, as I said, is traditionally pretty populist, pretty workers-focused, pretty class-focused. And despite growing inequality, which should lead to growing populism, we've seen them trend toward more like a kind of intersectionality and kind of identity politics. And this is probably because metropolitans have become such a huge voting base, and problems of multiculturalism are a central problem in cities like New York and Toronto and Los Angeles and whatnot. All these mega cities that where they can expose these kind of fractures in identity to kind of pander to voters, as opposed to standing up for workers. And we've seen this, like, this trend is obvious if you look at parties like establishment parties like the Democrats in the last few elections and the Liberals in the last few elections. We've seen this kind of hollowing out of options for the kind of people's movement, and that's why we're seeing the rise of popularity for the Jeremy Corbyns and the Bernie Sanders and the Trumps and the people that are willing to stand up for the workers, because no one's been standing up for them.
So let me ask you something. Why do you think that the left has lost these people? Why, like you said, traditionally, these kind of people hard on their, down on their luck, they would be gravitating towards those more left-leaning parties. What's happened?
I would say, like as I said, it's hard to tell because obviously this is a fervent voting base. But the only reason I can give is because that politics has been hijacked by these special interest groups and by these lobbyists and by these oligarchs, by this huge money, into kind of not focusing on the forces that would protect workers and kind of erode the profits of the powers that be.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that social issues have anything to do with that? Here's what I'm wondering. So, like you said, traditionally left-leaning parties, it's in their sort of wheelhouse to talk about the people at the bottom of society and talk about, free education and help in terms of, again, those people that need it. But also what's happened over time is that social issues, the left has definitely sort of staked their claim on one side of that debate, and the right has on the other. So whether that's the abortion debate, or sort of this nationalism, and is it that, yes, I'm a person that's sort of down on, I'm a hardworking, blue-collared person who would like the government to kind of do something for me, but then I don't necessarily align with the social issues. Is that where that sort of void has been filled by populism, or is it something else?
Well, I think there's just growing unrest due to the economic situations within just the average worker, and that's why this economic nationalism is increasingly popular due to the factors of globalization and stuff like this. But social issues just are very popular, even though they're not necessarily as practical. So I think they're marketable and easy to kind of to pander to voters in ways that making difficult changes against the wills of kind of these larger kind of plutocratic powers that be, these super rich kind of powers that kind of manipulate things to stay in their favor. Uh, uh, it's less controversial, kind of these social issues versus these real hard economic changes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Uh, so I'd say this is really central to how to how populism has been really emerging. I thought Frum's debating style, as you said, the second time you watched it, you were not as impressed by some of Frum's tactics. I thought most of the way that he debated was very underhanded. I thought you saw most of the typical kind of ways that these kind of straw man arguments and stuff like this to defame kind of the other side of the argument. Like he right off the bat he says populism is kind of evil, which doesn't really make sense. How that would be like you that's like a philosophical argument that I can't really understand how you'd make it. It's not even really an ideology. It's kind of a categorization of a type of policies or a type of campaigning. I don't see how that's necessarily evil, but he goes on to say that it always starts by like it's racist, it's anti-Semitic, it's like he says like when he talks about George Soros, what he's really saying, trying to say that he's anti-Semitic. He says they're racist because it's always focused on othering people. I don't exactly see what it's saying other than they're generally nationalist. They tend to other people that aren't citizens. Like I don't see how Trump has othered anyone. He's prevented certain people from entering into countries. While a lot of people criticize that it's because of their religion, like they are kind of insecure countries that have, that might not integrate as well into American society. Like there is pragmatic reasons behind it. He's deporting illegal immigrants. Like he's othered non-citizens. Like that seems like a reasonable kind of othering for a government to make.
Yeah, I think Frum is better than a lot of those points that he made. However, I would just make 2 points. One, being in that environment in front of that crowd, every time he made those points or he kind of led into that kind of argumentation, he would get a lot of applause. He knew that, is better than a lot of those support from that. So I can see how maybe it was tempting to do that. And you know what? To be honest, like while I can agree that, like a person like maybe Steve Bannon or others who are, sort of in the higher echelons of this organizing of and planning of this populism, they may not be racists or xenophobes or anti-Semites. Unfortunately, the movement does attract a lot of those people. So like that Soros point was an interesting one. And I struggled with it a little bit myself because I know what people say about George Soros. But I also know, and you're just 2 clicks away from going on like a 4chan or an 8chan or something, and it is intertwined. It is people who are like, George Soros, that Jew, and so those people do exist, and unfortunately they're part of all that. And now it's somebody like Frum choosing to focus on that may not be fair to the whole argument, but unfortunately it's there.
Yeah. I just thought it was kind of like these kind of dog whistling terms that just tried to derail the argument instead of directly approaching the idea of populism and stuff. And yeah, there's going to be citizens that are racist online and stuff like this. And they're going to support one party or another, but that's not about the central idea of the party. And to accuse Trump of being anti-Semitic just because he said something bad about George Soros is a bit of a stretch. And I thought the way that Bannon responded to that, saying that it's not that people don't like George Soros because he's a Jew, it's because he's effective. It's because he's effective and he's proud of how effective he is. And it's not like just George Soros, it's not like there's like a conspiracy theory that George Soros is pulling all the strings, like that would be the typical kind of anti-Semitic kind of comment. Like he actively owns these kind of non-government organizations that focus on these kind of left-wing international issues that and promote them and stuff like this. So like, it's not this kind of crazy kind of racist anti-Semitic conspiracy. It's George Soros is good at promoting the kind of very much reverse side of what Bannon is reporting or what championing even. Uh, so yeah, there was a bunch of comments that they kind of kept circling back to Trump and the problems with that. Uh, did you enjoy your time at the debate? Did you?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, I always do. And you know what's amazing? And people who maybe haven't watched these before, um, from the outside looking in, it may seem like these are sort of very dry topics, debated by very dry, old white men. But like it does get very entertaining. They're witty, and not just these two, not just Frum and Bannon, but others that I've seen on Monk debates. These people are witty. They're smart. They joke. They get the crowd laughing. Bannon had very little support in the crowd. There were a few people that would clap for some things. There was one woman who was quite vocal and showing her support, and she had done that several times. You could just hear her. She was like the only one doing it. And at one point Bannon said, "Thanks, Mom," and just the whole place erupted in laughter. And he did refer several times to being in Toronto and it being a tough crowd, and because people gave him a hard time, and it was great. And I think this was interesting. So if you've watched any interviews with Bannon in the past, he states that he loves going into hostile territory. And over the last year, he's actually only been doing interviews with sort of what his supporters would consider sort of like the enemy, these mainstream media outlets, etc. And I think he enjoys it. But like I said, I saw him rattled. He was rattled. He got, the crowd got under his skin a little bit, I thought, a few times.
Yeah, the crowd was definitely very against him. I thought he handled it pretty well, and I really liked that one comment. That definitely made me laugh. And when you can bring that down, that hostile crowd with a comment like that,
Yeah,
it's
and you
always
know what? The
good.
crowd showed him respect, which was the other awesome thing. Not just like applauding for when he came out, but there was a point in the debate where he mentioned that, or it was brought up that he had served in the military and that his daughter was currently in
Hmm.
the Air Force, I believe.
Yeah,
And everybody clapped, and that was genuine. There
yeah,
wasn't any jeering and there's a possibility to that. I mean, as in general, we have some opinions as Canadians about especially the American military or army or whatever. So that could have gone,
yeah.
awry. But no, but it was respect, and it was very nice to see.
And it was funny a couple of times. I think the crowd got confused, and they kind of stagnated and didn't. There was some positive things that Bannon said that they didn't know how to respond to properly, like when he starts talking about anti-interventionism and how he wants our military pulled out of the Middle East and stuff like this. Then that's a very popular like left wing topic, right? Anti-interventionism is classically left wing, and when he starts talking about that, the crowd's like, "Yeah, I guess we support it, but I hate that guy. I don't know what to do." And there was a couple of times when he would say something and they would laugh, and then he would give backing to what he's saying, and then everyone would be like kind of stunned silent. Like early on, he said something like, "Economic nationalism doesn't care about your race, gender." Blah 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 blah
And
blah,
that's where
and
people
everyone
really
laughs
laughed.
at him,
Yeah.
and he's just like, but wait, like look at the U.S., like lowest black unemployment rate of all time, like lowest Hispanic unemployment rate in 30 years, and everyone's like, stunned silent, like don't know what to say.
Yeah, definitely.
Uh,
So no, it was very enjoyable. I think everybody who went there enjoyed themselves regardless of their points of view on the whole thing.
Yeah, I thought it was funny how they kind of even really kind of embodied both of their the kind of divide within the issue. Like Frum was very much like the like even the way they were dressed and everything. Like he comes in the nicer suit than Bannon. Bannon has his usual kind of two collared shirts on because he always wears two collared shirts for some reason. No tie on because he never wears a tie. Uh,
Khakis, I think. If
yeah,
I'm
like
not,
just
yeah.
like like right off the bat, he doesn't look nearly as elitist. Even like the way that they both talk, the diction that they used. Frum is a very like he's a speechwriter by trade. Like he's a
Hmm.
very talented speaker, and he definitely used some artful language with which on first glance sounds effective, but it's just on second thought, it's like, wait, that's so meaningless. Like, you just strung together some jargon, but like on critical analysis, it doesn't mean much. You just accused like populism of being evil, which sounded good, but like, what? And stuff like that. Even at one point, he says he's talking about Trump's uh, head of trade negotiations and stuff, Navarro, and he says he does have a PhD, but no peer-reviewed articles. And it's like, how like elitist can you get? Like, even this dude with a PhD isn't good enough. Like, so I thought that was kind of funny. Like, and the way that Trump, like Bannon would even react to things compared to how Frum would react to things. Like he would always laugh when Frum attacked him humorously and stuff like this, which just made him seem more genuine, I thought. And then Frum was always like taking notes and like diligently, whereas he was more laid back, and his body language was like, and he was always jovial with the crowd, like, tough crowd, like I'll get you on my side by the end of this and stuff like this. I thought that was interesting how they kind of.
It was a wonderful sparring session to watch because in the end, like, these guys are both conservatives, right? So, and it's like you said, it's like that establishment conservative, all dressed up in a suit and tie, versus like this new age conservative, which, like, I encourage everyone to go on YouTube and search for conservative, what's out there in terms of the content that's being created, and that's exactly like you said what it is.
Yeah. So I think that's a perfect way to kind of transition into our kind of last closing segment, which is that kind of new age versus old age conservatism here in Canada. As I mentioned earlier, we've kind of seen the same divide that was present in this debate between the kind of, I struggle to get terms because the term alt-right has been bogarted by the Nazis, but it's really the what seems classical to me now, but the neocon position of David Frum versus the kind of new neo conservative or new right or alt right or whatever you want to call it on Steve Bannon's side. And
Mm-hmm.
that kind of divide has emerged in Canada as well, with Andrew Scheer of the CPC kind of sticking with the more traditional establishment neocon position, and now Maxime Bernier kind of emerging as a blatantly populist icon with his new People's Party of Canada. So, as I understand it, you've been a longtime conservative, Adam. How do you feel about this schism?
Yeah, it makes me sad. It really does. I could be wrong, but it seems to me like we're better off together. The Conservative Party of Canada kind of did that in the past by bringing a couple of parties that had splintered, and I think that's where we did some of our best work. I'm not a party member, but I'm a voter, and I've voted Conservative in the federal on the federal level, and I voted for Stephen Harper, and I thought Stephen Harper did a great job, and I think he did that because he was able to govern and to by conservative principles while keeping a lid on some of the more extreme aspects of the party, which really didn't need to be brought up, like abortion, for example. And I don't know. You'll have to educate me on some of the stances of the People's Party of Canada, but I don't know that this will be helpful in trying to defeat Justin Trudeau a year and a bit from now. Um, so I'm worried.
Skeptical.
What? Yeah.
So those are some reasonable criticisms. There are definitely some popular criticisms. First, I like to point out to all these kind of anyone who's a kind of establishment conservative who says, I like the Stephen Harper era. I like to point out that if we look back to the kind of reform era, although which is the last time we saw this conservative schism, uh, despite the conservatives never gaining power during that period, the liberals had to hop over to the right to kind of to continue to capitalize on their votes. Much like nowadays, we've seen the liberals go from center left further left. During that age, the new party on the right pulled the whole conversation to the right. So we saw prime ministers like Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien, and they governed arguably from a even further right position than Stephen Harper did. And that is in large part to how the Reform and later the Canadian Alliance changed the kind of the way the conversation was being had. So I definitely it's no surprise I criticize Justin Trudeau a lot on this channel, and I'm not a big fan of him. I think he's taking Canada in a poor direction at a turbulent time in international politics. I don't see Andrew Scheer as a real solution to that. I think he'll do less dumb stuff, but I don't think he'll really guide our country in a way that will kind of recover from this Trudeau era and remain kind of powerful in our own right and successful, at least for our citizens. Whereas I think Maxime Bernier offers a lot of policies that are very different from Justin Trudeau's and will really benefit the country in a lot of ways. And we can get more into depth about that if you're curious.
I'm very curious, actually. Yeah.
But I feel that generally speaking, as the Liberals have jumped to the left and kind of failed over there, the Scheer Conservatives have jumped to the left to want to catch all of the disenfranchised Liberal voters, as opposed to trying to fire up their own base and provide real right-wing policy solutions. And my co-host Andrew will disagree with me, and will continue to fervently debate this, because like you, he's still he's skeptical of the People's Party of Canada and supportive of the CPC. But the way I see it, Bernier is really the only actually right-wing party. Now we have like kind of the NDP and the Liberals on the left, the Conservatives in the center, and Maxime Bernier on the right. And Scheer has said this himself in an interview with The Sun like last week. He said that he's looking to govern from a centrist position with people of all sorts of different opinions. And of course it's a nice sentiment. It's just, I think we need larger change than that. I think we need some more fiscal tightening. I think we need some change in our economic policy to remain competitive with Trump's America. I think we need to make big changes to get pipelines to Tidewater. I think we need, like, there are a number of issues which I don't think the Conservatives are willing to take a strong enough stance on.
And so what are the issues or that so far that you've seen Andrew Scheer sort of fail on, in your opinion?
So the Scheer Conservatives have released very little of their platform, whereas Maxime Bernier's, or at least most of what the platform will be come election time, is already released on their website. But again and again, we've seen the Conservatives kind of offer these medium solutions. The first one that comes to mind is this whole immigration crisis that we've been having. Despite Michelle Rempel grilling the Trudeau Liberals for months and building her YouTube following all on this issue, the solution they offer is to give a path to citizenship to most of the 40,000 illegal immigrants that have entered our country over the last 2 years, and these illegal immigrants that are already too taxing on provinces like Quebec and Ontario to sustainably manage. These illegal immigrants that have posed a serious problem over the last few months, and will continue to prove a serious problem due to backstops and backlogs in the processing of them. So that's the kind of medium, not as controversial kind of solution that the CPC are offering, whereas the People's Party are willing to kind of step out and take a more controversial stance and be more willing to deport illegal immigrants
Hmm.
and slim down on the amount of immigrants that the country takes in on a yearly
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah, and I definitely recall, like, this is why Bernier was departed the party, the Conservative Party, because of his views on a lot of things like Canadian identity and things like that.
Uh,
Let me ask you though, do you think that in a country like ours, a party that takes too hard of a stance on some of these things can get enough votes to win a majority? Even
uh,
if, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
so there's a kind of number of answers to that. I would consider the People's Party a success, even if they just shift the conversation to the right and force the conservatives to be more conservative, and stuff like this. That in my view is a success, even especially considering Bernier wasn't able to do that from inside of the party. Since the leadership convention, he tried to air his views on important topics such as supply management, which was a huge holdup in the NAFTA negotiations, as well as many other international trade deals that we've been negotiating over the last few years. Uh, and these kind of criticisms on radical multiculturalism. There's a couple other topics that he was kind of outspoken on, but instead Andrew Scheer relegated him to the back bench. He encouraged him to be silent. He said that Maxime doesn't speak for the party. Like, he really pushed him to the outskirts of the party. So if Maxime is able to leave the party and force changes within it, I think that would be a big success, especially if it results in the Conservative Party offering policy that is acceptable to right wing Canadians and to the future of our country.
It will be interesting to see whether the average Canadian in a left-leaning country can, if a Maxime Bernier can get enough of those people on board, because let's face it, there's a certain amount of a base, and then but to really make a dent, you'll have to bring some of these people on board. And a Canadian conservative is very different than a conservative in other parts of the world.
Yeah. So I think the real interesting thing about Maxime's party is not only is it a right wing party, but it does have some other policies that are kind of interesting to more kind of even left wing voters, but I would say more kind of reform oriented voters. So even people who want to see kind of huge changes in the like anti-establishment kind of voters, like this will be the party for you. It's the new party. It's not from the kind of typical liberal conservative establishment, and policies like ending corporate welfare really would stand out to even left-wing voters who don't support that kind of thing. Like that's been a popular NDP kind of position for a long time. So I think this kind of party can appeal to people not only from the Conservative Party but from the Liberal Party, from the NDP Party, like those kind of traditional Chrétien, Martin era liberals will respect the kind of policies that are being offered by Maxime Bernier because they're similar policies. Uh,
Hmm.
a lot of his policies, especially on immigration, that's trying to be marketed as super controversial, he's not advocating massive changes. He wants to scale it back to the Harper eras of immigration, which is just 50,000 less people a year compared to current levels, whereas Justin Trudeau is planning to increase it. Who knows how much, based off of the new kind of UN compact that the Canada signed on to. Like he's not saying let's just shut the doors. Like he's just saying let's scale it back a bit and let people integrate and stuff like this. So although though he'll be marketed as a super inflammatory character, I don't think he truly is. I think he's offering some pretty reasonable policies across the board.
Do you worry that, so if we assume this new order of there being, so from the left, sort of NDP, then liberals, and now on the right, the conservatives, and then the PPC, do you worry about Bernier sort of having a lot of those more extremist people that could be again associated with his movement and tarnish his image, sort of gravitate more towards that side?
Well, again, like extremists are going to vote for someone, like I don't think that's a problem. I like they shouldn't be involved with the party. They shouldn't have control over how things are done and stuff like this. But like, what do
Right,
they
so,
not to get to vote?
no, no,
As
of
long as
course.
he's not pandering to them and like
Yeah,
and
but the
being
media,
racist.
I can already see what the media is going to do, right? Like just like we talked about with everything else,
You should.
left-leaning media will zero in on those people and their views
Have you
and
seen the
try to.
CBC interview with him?
No, I haven't. I should take a look.
It's absolute slander.
Hmm.
Like it's a 12-minute interview, and the first half of it, she doesn't even talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
For some like just tip of the iceberg. The title of the interview is like Bernier on the rebel media and libertarian politics, not like new leader of the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier. Like they don't
Mm-hmm.
show the logo of the party once. They say the name of the party once, maybe twice. It starts with this huge segment about how he's actually connected to the Koch brothers and this international populist movement and how he's like totally begotten to international billionaires. And the only connection that she has is that two of his staffers worked for the Fraser Institute, which is like the biggest right wing think tank in Canada. That gets that gets some of its funding from the Atlas Network, which gets some of its funding from
Mm-hmm.
the Koch brothers, and they worked there like a decade ago,
Mm-hmm.
and she's accusing them of being like still beholden to these kind of entities. It's just absolutely absurd. But I think
And that's to be expected, right?
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
pretty
it's
absurd.
CBC, but the again the same kind of things that plague the NDP with some of these unpalatable characters that the right likes to bring up, of an MP that doesn't want to wear a poppy or like this and that. The media will do the same to a party that's further on the right, like a PPC. And is there something that Bernier can do differently? Like for example, Jagmeet Singh wasn't able to deal with that at all, or hasn't been able to deal with that at all.
Well, Jagmeet Singh is irrelevant, and that's going to play really well for both the PPC and the Liberals. Uh, but yeah, that's definitely important, and especially the candidates and properly vetting people is definitely a major concern. I know for a fact that it's a major concern in the party, and just not only getting to know the people, but also scrubbing through their social media and stuff for any of these unpalatable or controversial or unacceptable views. And obviously, you have to kind of toe the line with a certain amount of free speech, but like it's politics. Like you have to you have to have a good image at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
it's going to be difficult because it's a huge rush. Like they're trying to set up all 338 EDAs before the new year. And then after the new year, they're going to have to find 338 candidates. And they're going to have to make sure all 338 candidates are clean. And they're going to have to do all the campaigning and raise a bunch of money all before October 21st of next year, which is less than a year away. So it's definitely a gargantuan task. And it's important to not let essential things like vetting fall through the cracks.
Mm-hmm. It'll be very interesting, and now we're gonna see, is more choice better? We're sort of going in the opposite direction of the States, right? Two-party system, and here we're growing our parties, right? They're multiplying, so it'll be interesting for sure.
Well, I really wouldn't be surprised if this schism is temporary, just like the last time.
Mm.
Like it only lasted what 2 or 3 election cycles before Stephen Harper brought the party back together. So I
Mm-hmm.
could see that happening depending on the results even after this election. Like
Mm-hmm.
it would be pretty absurd. But what if Justin Trudeau wins a slim majority or a minority government, but then Bernier wins opposition? Now all of a sudden it's easy to reunite the party under Bernier or something like this. I wouldn't be surprised. Like if the Conservatives want to throw out Andrew Scheer after a poor showing in this election, like I could see the party realigning,
Mm-hmm.
or even in a slightly more distant future. But I would be surprised if this was a kind of permanent split.
Mm. Well, anything's possible.
Yeah, you never know. So that's why you just gotta keep trying and you know, work for what you believe in.
Yeah, no, and it definitely, I hope it'll make more people pay attention, right? That's what Trump has done. That's what this debate with Bannon, like all these things are bringing these things closer to people, are getting more people to pay attention. And hopefully that's a good thing
Yeah.
because the last thing we want is, continued decreases in turnout, voter turnout, and, people just saying, screw it, my vote doesn't count and whatever. And that's where some of the worst stuff happens, and politicians take advantage.
Yeah, and the more people that are paying attention, the more people to watch my show. So
That's right.
even better. So I think this is a good place to cut off because we've been going on for a bit over an hour now. So everyone make sure and follow Adam's pages. It's all right over there, right below Adam's head, below the fold on YouTube and on Facebook. And be sure to tune in to True North News again tomorrow. I'll be doing another interview with Rance Derrick, and a pretty popular Canadian YouTuber. Looking forward to chatting with him, and thank you so much, Derek, for giving us that shout out on your last video. But until then, thanks for coming on to the show, Adam. Hopefully, we'll have you again sometime soon, and stay informed, friends.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.